Happy 2024. I hope you guys had a safe, happy, and drama-free holiday season. 2023 was a very productive reading year for me. My goal was to read 40 books, and I finished the year with 52, which is not much compared to some other people who read 80 or even 100. But for me, it's a huge personal achievement considering that I've had very little free time in my day to read or even make content for my channel. For 2022, I rank my top 15 reads. For 2023, I'm taking a whole different approach since I had a very difficult time ranking them this time around. In my eyes, all of these books deserve to be number one, but I do have a favorite among them. So without further ado, here are my top 15 favorite.
The cream of the crop!
First off, we have It by Stephen King, a book that's been number one on various rankings and is a near-perfect masterpiece. Unfortunately, one well-known and controversial section in the book holds it back from reaching perfection. Aside from that, it's easily one of the best, if not the best, coming-of-age horror stories. The Way We Dan by Philip Chase, aka Dr. Fantasy. I'm a huge fan of his booktube channel and probably wouldn't be reading anything in the fantasy genre if he didn't hype me up into reading the Malazan series. His self-published debut novel really caught me by surprise. It has all the elements you love about classic fantasy, but he still manages to craft a story that feels fresh and compelling. Easily one of the best fantasy novels I've read. To top it all off, he released a complete trilogy in 2023. Check out the books and his YouTube channel if you haven't done so already.
Boy's Life by Robert McCammon. This is probably one of the best Stephen King books not written by Stephen King. If there's a coming-of-age novel to rival King's It, this is the one. Boy's Life is a supernatural mystery novel that takes place in small-town Alabama in the early 1960s. It's my first experience reading Robert McCammon, and it definitely won't be my last.
Shadow of the Torturer by Gene Wolfe. I did a full video review earlier last year. So much to unpack and analyze in such a short novel. Not only is it one of the best books I've read this year, I think it's one of the best written works of sci-fi next to Dune.
Ghost Story by the late, great Peter Straub. If you're looking for a creepy, gothic, supernatural story that takes place in the cold of winter, look no further. Fans of The Shining and The Thing will feel right at home with this masterpiece of horror. Where Boy's Life and It were coming-of-age tales centering around young protagonists, Ghost Story is a coping-with-age story about a group of elderly men fighting against the evil dark forces. This book instantly became my favorite horror novel. Now, this might be a controversial choice because I also read the original Dune for the first time in 2023. For this list, I'm going with Dune Messiah, not because it's a better book, but mainly because I already knew how the story played out prior to reading it. Dune is a bona fide classic, and like Lord of the Rings, it's one of those stories that's so ingrained in our culture, you're practically born already knowing the story. Dune Messiah, on the other hand, I knew nothing about and found it to be a compelling and fascinating character study of Paul Atreides. I know some fans find it to be a disappointing sequel. It's less than half the length of the original Dune, but I think if you view it as more of a novella or Dune 1.5, you might find it to be a much more enjoyable experience that bridges into the next full-length sequel, Children of Dune.
Dragons of Autumn Twilight by Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman. Since being a kid in the 1980s, I've seen Dungeons & Dragons books stacked on the shelves at bookstores like Walden Books and B. Dalton. I was always fascinated by the cover art, but never got around to reading them for some reason. Well, better late than never, because this book captivated me in ways I haven't felt since watching the original Star Wars trilogy for the very first time. Dragons of Autumn Twilight was just plain fun. I've been absorbing myself in everything D&D ever since. I plan on binging on more of these books, along with the Forgotten Realms series this year. Stoner by John Williams, not the movie composer, is a book recommended by many fantasy booktubers that's not even a fantasy novel. It's actually a fictional story about the life of a scholar. I probably would have never bothered reading this book if it wasn't so highly recommended. Good thing I gave it a shot because I can't stop thinking about this thought-provoking story. This is one of those books that makes you put your life into perspective. John Williams was such a gifted and talented writer. It's a shame that he was only able to write 4 novels in his lifetime. Even more reason to check out his work. Tigana by Guy Gavriel Kay. Guy Gavriel Kay writes stories like Da Vinci paints portraits. His prose is beautiful, poetic, yet accessible. It's a deeply character-focused story in a fantasy world that looks to be inspired by ancient Mediterranean culture. I adore this book on so many levels, and it makes me sad that it's only a standalone. I would love to see Guy Gavriel Kay revisit these characters someday.
The Tombs of Asuan by Ursula K. Le Guin is the second book in the Earthsea series. I enjoyed The Wizard of Earthsea, but The Tombs of Antuan takes the story in a different direction that I found fascinating and compelling. It's a dark, brooding, mystical tale that introduces us to a new protagonist named Arha. Ursula K. Le Guin challenges many fantasy tropes and explores some coming-of-age themes, including faith and gender. There's a lot of exploring through dark, creepy labyrinths that gave me vibes of the underworld dungeons in The Legend of Zelda. Of the first 3 Earthsea books I've read so far, this is by far my favorite.
Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. Like Stoner, this is another book that caught me by surprise. I never imagined a story about an orc opening a coffee shop in a fantasy town would be so enjoyable. I also did a full review on this early last year.
Joyland is Stephen King's second entry into the pulpy, hard-case crime novel series of books. In this story, King goes deep into amusement park lore and mixes in a murder mystery that has some supernatural elements. It's also a coming-of-age tale, which King does so well, about a young man coming out of high school who takes a summer job at an amusement park. It's a perfect end-of-summer into spooky season read. If Stephen King wrote an episode of the Scooby-Doo mysteries, this is practically it. Love this book to pieces and would place it on my top 3 favorite King books I've read so far. Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. If I did a ranking list of my top page turners of 2023, this would easily take the #1 spot. It's a sci-fi thriller that deals with quantum mechanics and parallel universes. Fortunately, you don't need to be a physicist to understand the concepts in the story. It's a book that was so edge of your seat that I flew through it in 2 days. It's my first introduction to Blake Crouch, and it certainly won't be my last. Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. Amazing how a book written in 1953 reads like something written in 2023. It's a dystopian novel about a society where books are outlawed. In this future, firemen are not here to save people, but used as enforcers to torch books and punish anyone who illegally carries them. The story is chock full of social commentary, and you can draw parallels to current events such as book banning and the ill effects of mass media on society. The story reminds me of an episode of The Twilight Zone, and with how the world is right now, we are not that far off. Fahrenheit 451 is essential reading, and for something that will take you no more than a day or two to read, there is no reason for anyone to pass this up. And now for my #1 of #1s, and that is The Dragonbone Chair by Tad Williams. Book #1 in the Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn series. Modern day fantasy wouldn't be what it is today if it wasn't for this guy. This book was basically the bridge that took us from classic fantasy like Lord of the Rings to modern fantasy like Game of Thrones. George R.R. Martin even attributes the series as being one of his core inspirations for writing his Song in Ice and Fire series. What Tad Williams did for the genre was at a whole new level of sophistication and realness that wasn't seen before. What I really loved about this book is that you really get to feel the journey of our main protagonist, Simon. I've seen some readers complain that this story was a bit on the slow side. I completely disagree because Tad carefully plots his stories with world building and character development. There's a lot of slice of life stuff early in the book, but things never drag for me because the plot keeps moving. His method of pacing elevates the suspense, intrigue, and build-up. You really get to feel the weight of every action scene and major event. I can see how Tad Williams has become your favorite fantasy author's favorite author. It's insane how underrated his massive catalog of work is. A Dragonbone Chair is essential reading for any fantasy fan, and will probably appeal to readers of all genres. And that concludes my 15 favorite books of 2023. For 2024, I don't envision myself reading as many as last year. My goal is to focus on reading novels on my TBR that are about 800 plus pages. I'd like to go back to reading at a slower pace so I can enjoy the books and not feel so rushed. So less quantity, but more memories. And with that said, I'd like to wish you all a happy, healthy, and safe 2024. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe, and I will catch you guys on the next page.